Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to come back here to Napa New Tech. As Tom had mentioned, I think it was about 5 years ago this week, and I always remember because we actually interviewed with Don on Valentine's Day. So it's there's always periods of time that stick in my mind, and Valentine's Day comes up, and New Tech's been just a wonder for me in my career, and really seeing the opportunities that we can kind of share back with you in this community. So I always, nice little anniversary every year when that comes around. It has taken a team to really deliver and to transform this facility. And anything you like about the facility, send it my way. Any comments you have, things you don't like, that's why Pete's right here. But all kidding aside, this really has been an honor. And one of the things that we really embraced as part of our planning process was first and foremost understanding who you are and your curriculum and your learning model of project-based learning. We saw some tremendous opportunities. And most specifically, keep coming back to this whole concept as school as a teaching tool. You're in an environment that has a tremendous opportunity of influencing your learning environment, as well as providing opportunities for an awareness, environmental awareness. And we're going to talk a little bit today, first and foremost, about the renewable energy project. If time permits, we've got some additional information that we're more than glad to share. A lot of what you're going to see today in the format is kind of surrounding you. There's a sustainable signage program that is sprinkled throughout this entire campus that begins to note all of the sustainable attributes and how they've influenced the design of this building and how they're influencing the environment. The summary of those is categorizing how this project is actually going to be achieving a LEED Gold to the United States Green Building Council. We're in the process right now of doing our final commissioning on the PV scope. We'll be submitting that application, and then there will be another get-together and celebration of a significant milestone of achieving LEED Gold, which really was spirited by the students. So I'm going to start flipping through some slides here. And first and foremost, I am an architect by training. I've got a passion for education. I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to all these other systems, so I'm going to walk that fine line today. And at a certain point when I start stepping over, that's why we've got some experts in the industry with one son that can kind of help bail me out if I go too far. This sign right here, many of you may have seen, it was originally placed, and I think it still exists as the first sign you walk into on the right-hand side in the front door. And this concept here was one that we had a preliminary design of looking at renewable energy. It didn't happen in the initial scope of work intentionally because we had to wait for the funds for this modernization scope to actually come back from the state in order to make those improvements. The districts honored that commitment and then followed through with those improvements. And during that time, we had started taking a look at a few different options. There's a lot of various systems that exist in the industry with thin film and with crystalline, with carport structures, with rooftop installations. First and foremost, and if you can pause here as we wait for the interference on the projector. There's an image in the bottom left-hand side. If you kind of blink with it, you can kind of focus on it. That image begins to show you and really where in the United States the most opportunity exists to collect and gather solar energy. So everything from the brown to the reds has that most opportunity, and then from there, when you start going out, primarily up in New England, where you've got more seasonal impacts and such, they're less efficient. So what it shows you there is environmentally, there's tremendous opportunity of utilizing a natural resource, renewable resource. So what does that mean for Napa New Tech? We've got a system that's both looking at carport structures, as well as rooftop installation. We've got a few pictures because I didn't think the school would be too excited with taking a trip up to the roof, so we can kind of show you that for you. A rain check another day. Of a PV system size, that's roughly 109 kilowatt system. We got a system generation that's has the opportunity of producing about 154,000 kilowatts annually. Now, what does that mean for you? And we're going to come back to this a little bit more. But the opportunity where the renewable energy that the system on this campus can offset, projected about 47% of your annual electrical usage. Long and short, what that means is that's 47% additional that the district doesn't have to pay to PG&E, that they can keep in this district, keep in the classrooms, and keep in the programs for this community. That's extremely powerful. System cost for this array was looking at about $655,000. For any guru out there, we are looking at both carports and PV structures, so there's a little skewing of those numbers if you, based on any research you would have done, because obviously you've got some inherent costs with a carport structure, which have tremendous opportunities, environmental impacts, reducing heat island, providing shade and protection, that don't have a direct return on investment. But that's the cost of the totality of the system for this scope. So quickly, a little renewable energy 101. Definition of renewable energy is energy which comes from natural resources such as sunlight, wind, rain, tides, and geothermal, which are renewable. That's a good thing. Those exist in a manner that allow us to capture energy. What are some of those examples? We've got windmills, we've got top left, top right, we've got the ability of capturing water through hydro dams. Bottom left, we've got geothermal, looking at using the actual ambient temperature of the earth. And this has actually been implemented down at American Canyon High School, as well as we have solar PV arrays in fields for that. Similar concept to obviously what we have here. This is looking at more of a mass scale of a facility as a PV kind of plant system. Facts. I like facts and kind of sharing facts. The ability to, discovering of the ability to capture and convert light into energy was actually discovered in 1839. But ironically, it took until 1890 to actually begin to say, how do we begin to use that? What does photovoltaic mean? Lowest common denominator. Photo is the Greek word for light, and volt comes from the electrical pioneer Alessandro Volta. So begin, and kind of what I'd like to share some of these pieces is that everything can always be broken down into the smallest common denominator. And when you begin to understand those roots, you begin to kind of understand how things are derived and where things go from. I found this as kind of an interesting diagram here, 1839, 1890, and now all of a sudden we got a graph here that starts out in 2004 that's beginning to look at the global impact of the use of renewable energy, from hydro to wind in blue to biomass in green to solar kind of sitting down here. So interesting, from 04 to from 10, we're starting to, and specifically here, 07, 08 range, we're starting to see the use of solar. Now, obviously, one can begin to question, well, why aren't, if wind's that popular, why aren't we doing wind? Part of what we have to always keep in mind is the infrastructure that we're dealing with in an existing urban environment, where there's obviously getting a windmill into downtown Napa here probably was something would not work. So we're going to kind of look at our constraints and look at our opportunities. But here are some of the natural resources. What's I find most interesting about this is really a developing economy, and a developing economy that is going to grow exponentially in our lives. And what I see about that one is there's trends. There's now there's a consciousness that says we need to be doing more about protecting our environment. What does that mean directly for you? How are these systems being designed? How are they being installed? More importantly, how are they being maintained? Tremendous avenues of growth and potential that exist from professionalism and career pathways. Just the notion of kind of where some of this renewable technology is going. Operation. Here's the quick little diagram. Solar energy receives its, we first start out with the sun. The panels are going to collect the sunlight, It's going to convert that into energy that initially can't be used until it goes through an inverter. And then after the inverter, there's a few different avenues on where that goes, whether it goes directly back into the building. Sometimes it goes into battery type systems, or sometimes it just goes back directly into the grid. Ours here is going into the grid, and I'll kind of go back through that here in a little bit. The solar panels. Least common denominator, bottom left, is a cell. So the cell is the organizing component that is collecting the sun. From that, a collection of cells will make a module. Now, if you look here, what that module is, if you look at our picture up on the roof, you begin to see a collection of modules individually. Now, those collection of modules are then wired in to create arrays. And those arrays are really what begin to kind of create that economy and scale in order to collectively gather the energy, retain it, and bring it back and push it back into the system. Image in the top right was the field trip I promised you. Great views up there. Enjoy the picture. Looking back out not only towards a portion of our rooftop installation, carport, and a nice little mountain view in the background. This other one over here, everyone has seen, so no field trip required, in the parking lot. And interesting here, you begin to kind of see that infrastructure and how the panel systems are wired and interconnected, and how those arrays actually function. Once we've gathered the energy, a little bit of science here, the notion that the sunlight is gathered in what's called a direct current. That direct current has to go to an inverter. The inverter then converts it to AC, alternating current. And alternating current is the power that is within the electrical system that we all use, various volts and frequencies. DC power really is our source, but in order to use it, once again, we need AC power in order to convert that. And then once again, once we have that, the ability to tie back into the meter. And when you tie back into the meter with a PV system, it does actually spin backwards. That notion that we're pushing more energy. We can't see that here, but we can show you where we're actually going to be able to see it in a little bit. So now we've got this monitoring, we've got a PV system, we're gathering energy, we're putting it back into the system. Now how do we monitor this? Well, how we monitor it, what we have here is a snapshot of the dashboard. This dashboard we'll come back to in a little bit. This dashboard sits on the monitor out front, and we'll kind of go through how to talk through that. Long and short on this dashboard, and this was grabbed from yesterday at 8:30 in the morning, and I was looking at the projections from the month, is that you have the top graph, which is called building consumption. So building consumption is the amount of electricity that this building, this campus, this site, and everything on its meter is using. When you skip down to the bottom graph, we have generation. Generation is what the solar panel system is actually collecting at that actual point in time. So when you take the consumption, you take the generation, what that does is give you the net consumption. That net consumption ultimately is what the district is having to pay for as part of the electrical usage. Building consumption. So we start with what we base our usage on. Interesting fact, PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, have various rate structures. So depending on if you're a residential or a commercial or an industrial, there's different rate structures. This campus was what was called on an A10 rate structure, bottom before solar. What that meant was, before solar, I'll come over here so I keep my discussion going. We had rates that were based on, we had a summertime rate and we had a wintertime rate. And in average, that total rate was about 15 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, PG&E says, well, if you're going to benefit from having solar, we're going to give you a different rate structure. If you're going to benefit based on the fact that you can gather energy when the peak time of the year, the sun's the hottest, the days are the longest, we're going to penalize you for that. Because if you've got to win, then where's our counter on that one? So what we actually are under now is a A6 structure called after solar. And they break this out, and they break it out in a manner that says, before we just had a summer and winter rate. Now we've got a summer rate, on peak, part peak, off peak. We've got a winter rate, part peak, off peak. What this means that our before, under the old rate structure, our summertime, I can't even cheat right now. Our summertime rate was about 13 cents a kilowatt hour. Thank you. Or not. Our solar rate for summer on peak is 43 cents per kilowatt hour. 13 to 43. That's significant. I'll come back to that in a second. So what does that mean? That we've got, and we'll leave this presentation behind so you guys can have access to it after. Summertime is May through October. So you've got a 4 to 6 weeks of time. At the start of that, you're in session. You've got probably about the same thing on the back end. During that period of time, from 12 to 6 o'clock at night, this site pays peak costs. So from 12 to 6 o'clock at night, every bit of electricity that's used is being applied that 42 cent a kilowatt hour rate. So what that means is, I'm going to use classroom 4 as an example, and 1 and 2. Actually, let me use classroom 3 as a better example. Classroom 3 has their lights turned off. Classroom 3 is not consuming any building electricity. Classrooms 1, 2, and 3, and 4 right now are utilizing energy. So that concept before, a building as a teaching tool, our role here is to begin to empower every student to begin to think about their environment and the importance and the role that they have in their environment. We've got some interesting opportunities that exist, and our monitoring system is going to allow it, where we're going to have an opportunity to look back by next December at an entire year of data that could begin to say, how efficient were we in January? How efficient were we in February? Each class that comes through here, each program that comes through here can begin to look back. And I think there could be a nice little rewards program if at a point where you can kind of get to a datum that says, look, this year we've actually reduced our energy consumption than last. And that's something that's tangible, it's recordable, and it's something that we should all be looking at. Now those rates didn't change part peak and off peak. But the point of this slide here is that it's really a necessity to minimize all electrical consumption during on peak and part peak times, and especially in the wintertime. Because for us to be renewable, for us to be sustainable, for us to be green, after the installation of a PV system, we cannot afford to be paying PG&E more costs for electricity than we did before. Foundational component there. And we'll begin to kind of talk about, obviously the lights were one of those, and I appreciate the quick response in getting those turned off. The projection right now, and this comes back to kind of before solar, what our annual electricity costs were, as well as after solar, is looking at about 52% from a cash flow standpoint of an offset. Now, once again, these are only based on projections, and these projections are as only sound as how well you utilize these facilities and minimize your consumption. The dashboard. So I wanted to come back to the dashboard here and talk to you about the tools that you have at your resource at the front monitor, as well as live that everybody can access from your personal computer. The link is below here. The little logo slid over it. I'm going to flip over to that dashboard right now. And we should be live, but yes, we are live. Okay. So there is a little wheel up there turning under kilowatts per hour. So what we have here in this dashboard is a couple key items. We've got this the kilowatt AC, so this is what's being generated right now. We have the kilowatts per hour, so this is all live solar data. Ironically, if we had a cloud that came over us right now, we would actually see the live impact of what that shade coverage would be on our solar system. What's interesting through here is we've got each of these tabs. We've got solar that's being generated by minute, by day, by 3 days. So here you begin to start seeing the cycles. Sunrises, sunsets, sunrises, sunsets. And once again, we begin to see the building consumption, which is always the highest in orange. We have the generation, which is in green, which is typically the lowest, and your blue is your net consumption, that of what you have to pay for. It's going to kind of hover in between. What does that mean for the environment? There's a few items down bottom here that have been set. So as this system goes through and actually generates, you begin to see the other environmental benefits that we have. We have the total energy generated equals the equivalent of 56 60-watt bulbs for 1 year of 8-hour production of use. This right now is, and let me kind of put this in context, the system was turned on and interconnected at the end of December. So we've been live now for, say, 6 weeks. So this data that we're seeing is what we've done and are capturing within 6 weeks. So this is just a point in time and looking backwards. This is not the potential that we have. So these are always going to continue to grow. The total CO2 offset equals the equivalent of planting of 178 additional trees. The total energy generated equals 7 tons of CO2 saved, and the total energy generated equals 803 gallons of gas saved. So there's some examples there. And I believe there is opportunities of looking at a number of hair dryers and other various appliances and apparatuses, but I think this kind of gives you a sense that everything that we do has a direct impact on the environment. And though we may not think about it initially, there is a direct application. So I think on our solar side, that was about the extent of our structured presentation. Specifically on solar, are there any questions? Open the discussion up. Yes. What happens over summer? One of the beauties, so what happens over summer? This campus is not live with students, but the system is still generating. So one of the reasons why that rate structure was set the way it was is because PG&E is saying, if you're capturing the most energy in the summertime when you're using the least amount of energy, that's where they're going to kind of make that and have you pay for that different rate structure. That's where they're increasing it. The system keeps functioning and generating. At the end of the year, the way that the legislature is working out for renewable energy systems, the district will never get money back, but they have the ability to kind of balance that out. Now, obviously, we're about that hovering around 50%. So what it'll do is, in the wintertime right now, you're consuming more than you're using. In the summertime, that's going to flip. At the end of the year, there'll be a tally that'll balance it all out. out back. So the question was, is there an ability to capture the solar energy, store it in batteries, and have it be directly applied? Yes. I mentioned before that in concept there's two systems. One that pushes energy back into the system, one that you can retain in batteries. The initial concept was, for me when I was kind of understanding renewable energy, was why were we going to push it back into the system? Why don't we kind of keep it? Because of those time frames that we were just talking about, when we're collecting energy in the summertime, when we don't have the demand, would require a significant amount of battery storage. That battery storage, as we all know, batteries are bad for the environment because ultimately they burn through and we've got to find a disposal for them, and they don't dispose well. So there's a direct cost there, and to me, and I think a bigger environmental impact when it comes to the collection and usage for battery storage, that in this venue it makes more sense to push it back into the system. Now, if you weren't in an urban area, you were in a rural area, you didn't have the infrastructure, then maybe you start beginning to think about, okay, well, I want renewable energy, but the system isn't set up for it. Maybe there's an alternative for batteries where it makes better sense. I thought I saw another question over here. Yes?
How much does it cost to install solar panels?
The cost of solar panels, I can't necessarily give you a direct answer on that one. From the standpoint is there's a lot of anomalies that go into panel systems. I mentioned before specifically the cost of carport structures in that direct number there. I don't know if maybe OneSun maybe has some more generalized rules of thumbs when it comes to pricing for per panel or per watt. That's kind of in the industry. One of the things that we have seen is that graph I was pointing to before, where that bar graph was kind of going up. Well, as it's going up, the cost of renewable energy systems is going down. The market's getting more competitive. You've got more manufacturers in. Economy and scale are all there. So what's interesting is typically things are always naturally going up in cost, where this one's actually just trying to find its balancing point in the marketplace on where the system needs to be. Dave, is there any numbers? I don't want to avoid this question if there's
Yeah, you're absolutely correct there that the cost of solar is reaching what we call a tipping point, where it's cheaper now to use solar than it is to use coal to produce energy. So the tipping point came at about $1.05 a watt for the panel alone.
This slide over here seems to be a little quiet because I've been avoiding you guys because of the laptop, so I'm going to come visit you. Any questions over here? Yes?
Approximately how long will it take for it to pay off?
The payoffs, I don't recall where we landed on this system. Do you recall, Don, on that? I think we've, in concept, because I don't want to specifically look to this system, but in concept, we've been seeing them come down into the, say, 15 plus or minus year time frame, sometimes within the 20. And that may seem like that's a long period of time, but the manufacturers will actually guarantee the performance of these systems for 25 years. In that 25 years, there's about 0.5% of gradation that they allow. Technology exists, installations that exist that have PV panels that are still functioning that are 30 to 40 years old. So once again, it's always that tough part of looking at the initial investment, the life cycle cost, and the return on investment you can achieve. With that being said, our typical lifespan of a building like this one here before we modernized it was 25 years. So we're at a point where this is one of those systems where it makes sense for educational school facilities to implement it because of the impact and the longevity it has within its infrastructure. Time check. I'm looking for Tom. What time were we planning on going till? Was it 10? Oh, look at that. Okay, break at 10:30. So with these last 5 minutes, Tom was trying to hold me to the 45 minutes and not a minute less, so I apologize. He asked me to be prepared to address some additional, what are some of the other additional environmental attributes that this project in this school site has demonstrated. So I'm going to go back to a couple quick slides from another presentation I had in the queue. And of interesting note, this was, was actually a presentation that we gave to Sacramento Metropolitan Utility District to begin to showcase the great work that's being done down here in this community and what they should be thinking about supporting in that region. So let's see if I can get back to from current slide, okay. I mentioned before the sustainable signs that sit around the school. I'm going to kind of rattle through a few of those and really what that means. In concept, every sign begins to give you an understanding of the intent, gives you an impact, an understanding of how that's impacted our environment and how it's shaped our building. I'll go through these fairly quickly. Development density and community connectivity. How are you reducing your environmental impact by thinking about the facilities that surround the site and what you can walk to? We begin to identify what some of those are, and we encourage you to begin to think about that, whether or not it's before school, lunch, after school. But walking is a tremendous, has a tremendous opportunity of reducing our impact on the environment. The ability to look at both roofs and non-roofs. We've got a reflective white roof up on our roof. That white roof reflects energy. By reflecting the energy, it's putting it back into the environment versus driving it into the building, which then we have to worry about conditioning. We have obviously our PV shade structures and a lot of tree canopies and the ability to reduce that pavement such that you can actually be outside and enjoy it, where before, without shade protection and with asphalt as a great example, those systems heat up and become warm and they radiate, sending once again a negative impact on the environment. Water efficient landscaping. We've got several systems here, and this one's long and short on this one. Between the use of the landscape plantings, the selection of irrigation that was used, looking at the ability of keeping that water on site, our cistern, roughly 20,000+ gallons. The design of this one, by using all of these systems, reducing over 1 million gallons of potable water annually. So what we could legally get away from based on a traditional school design and where we are with a sensible design solution, we're not using over 1 million gallons of annual potable water. Potable being that's drinkable, usable water. Mentioned the water collection system. It's being fed from an area of the flat roof that sits right behind us over here. Unfortunately, he's probably feeling a little lonely this winter because we have not gotten the rain we've needed to keep it filled. Interior water use reduction. You probably all have seen we've got solar-powered water faucets. We've got dual flush toilets. In the boys' room, we've got waterless urinals. The selection of those fixtures is reducing about 254,000 gallons of annual potable water. So between the building and the site, we're roughly 1.3 million gallons of annual potable water. What does that mean on the environment? That's less we're having to pull in. That's less that's coming through our system. That's less that's going out as sewage that then has to be treated. Those are direct savings. We've got a optimized building envelope based on looking at both active and passive designs. Passive designs is where we have built-in shade protection in some of our cantilevers. We've got increased building insulation in the walls and in the roof. Those items that are inherent as part of the kind of the bones of the building that have a positive impact in reducing the amount of heating and cooling that we have to do and the amount of energy that comes in. We've got some specialty control systems. We've talked about renewable energy. Construction waste. On this project, we had diverted over 90% of our construction waste from the landfill. So what that means is that 90% of our construction waste was actually properly recycled. So the challenge there, and I'm going to wrap this thing up right here, because I think this is probably a good point for it, is that we saw an opportunity of thinking about who you are, the culture, the learning modality, project-based learning, and begin to provide a tremendous amount of opportunities and resource and tools to really create this as a school as a teaching tool. And if we can get contractors who come with their own kind of set of background and their own skill sets to divert 90% of the waste that they traditionally would just pick up and throw away, then my challenge to you is at least 90% of your waste needs to be taken care of over here through proper recycling. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek.